Hi everyone, welcome to ESOP Radio. Thank you for joining episode 3 of the ESOP Boot Camp. Topic today is why owners choose ESOPs and why they don't. Our goal with this series is to give you, the owner, CEO, or CFO of a successful business, the lowdown on ESOPs in a quick, straightforward manner because your time is valuable. I'm Trevor Gilmore, CEO of Menke.
And I'm Ben Spadt, Investment Banking with Menke. Since 1974, Menke has been a full-service ESOP advisor. We've seen it all, from a capital raise to ESOP structure to regulatory compliance to value and M&A. We've done thousands of ESOPs over the years, and as an ESOP ourselves, we're ESOP native.
That's right, Ben. And today we'll cover 3 key reasons why owners like you choose an ESOP and also why they don't. Number 1, liquidity versus legacy. Number 2, partial versus full exit motivations. What I mean by that is selling some of your company to an ESOP versus selling 100%. And number 3, when an ESOP is the wrong answer. And yes, sometimes it is. All right, Ben, let's go ahead and kick this off.
Yeah, this is a great topic today. And first of all, I think we should start with some definitions. What is legacy? What is liquidity? And first with liquidity, that just means getting some money out for your blood, sweat, and tears of owning this business. There's the pay you've received over time, but you have this asset. So how do you get cash out? And that's, a liquidity event, as they call it. So how does one do that? And, how does one structure that? Whether it be all of the company sold to the ESOP or just part of it. And then legacy, we defined that a little bit in the last episode, but for me it means, do I want this company to exist into perpetuity as it looks and feels now? Obviously it would change with the times, but what am I leaving behind? Trevor, do you have a little bit more maybe you want to add to that?
Yeah, exactly, Ben. Yeah, so you think legacy, right? And a lot of stuff comes up here. Sometimes in the context of like software, it actually can almost be like a bad word.
Right.
That company has a lot of outdated legacy software. In the context of business ownership and ESOPs and so on, legacy is generally a very much a positive thing because it speaks to your brand value, your brand promise. What does that mean? The continuity of all of that makes it awesome. So when you think ESOP and explore that option, legacy is very much an important aspect of why you might go ESOP, because if you care about the legacy and the company has an awesome legacy, staying independent should be one of your core goals here. And out of all the various liquidity options, ESOP often becomes the number one.
Right. So let's talk about how that fits in with the ESOP buying the company. It offers liquidity in that the ESOP is buying your shares for cash or for a note. And so, what if there's big offers dangling from some strategic buyer, somebody that wants to buy your market, whether it be a specific geographic market or maybe you have highly skilled employees that they want to access? Can an ESOP compete there, I guess is the first question. So, what have you seen, let's just say in the last year, in terms of, that strategic buyer that's perhaps interested, sniffing around, and how an ESOP competes?
Yeah, so here's the deal with an ESOP. The ESOP is always going to be a fair market value buyer. So it's a ready market for your company's shares. And of course, the big question is, what's fair market value?
Yeah.
Well, the answer is it's an arm's length negotiation. A strategic buyer, if there is one for your business, often they maybe appear out of nowhere. You start getting pinged by associates at a PE firm, maybe venture capital if you're in tech, and so on, who really want to talk. Or maybe it's the corporate dev person, for some larger conglomerate, that really wants to talk and take you to lunch, dinner, et cetera, right? And that's kind of how those discussions start. ESOP, totally different path. However, the final outcome often can be very similar. Strategic, and we'll move on here. Strategic, so we have this in a later episode, may or may not pay a higher price. Often dangle a high price in the negotiations, price gets whittled down, and earnouts are talked about, clawbacks, non-competes, and so on. ESOP, fair market value buyer, usually a pretty straightforward negotiation. It's a negotiation at the end of the day, but very transparent going in with a high likelihood of success. That is one key difference going ESOP versus strategic or even a financial buyer, is those typically have a very low likelihood. Often in due diligence, they get blown up. Whereas in ESOP, it's very rare for that to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so overall, when you think liquidity, okay, that drives a big decision to move ESOP. Outside of just the mentality of, hey, I really want to incentivize and reward my employees, make them shareholders by way of the ESOP. Usually it's liquidity, and then with that, partial, full, those are different options as well. And then legacy as well. If legacy is high up in terms of what you envision yourself, your company to be in the future, then the ESOP can be very much a compelling option.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think that we often see legacy taking sort of the front seat as opposed to liquidity. That people are proud of what they've built, proud of the people that work for them. That culture piece that we touch on quite a bit. If they have that strong culture, then liquidity, or even let's just say the dollar figure at the end of the day, matters less than that legacy. Is my company going to be the same or better off when I leave, when I sell? Who's going to be running it? That sort of thing. Those are very important. And I think, in the last few transactions we've worked on together, we've seen that does take the front seat. And I think that's a pretty telling metric when it comes to what's the right fit for you. Is it that strategic buyer versus an ESOP?
Yeah, exactly. A couple thoughts here too is the ESOP is a very much control your destiny option. As we said on the last episode, it's for the planners out there. You can very much control your destiny. If you hire a firm to shop you, the likelihood of actually having a successful transaction very low. You're going to be locked up for whatever period you negotiate with them. 6 months, 1 year. Sometimes you see 2 years, including tails, et cetera, built into that, right? So you're kind of stuck on that path. You go ESOP, you're typically not going to see all those same conditions because the ESOP is a much different outcome, much different process, but it's very much a choose your destiny and control it option versus the others. So it really just comes down to, hey, with my business, is it better off independent? Do I see my executives, management, and employees thriving under an independent structure or not? Is there IP, and so on, or market share being part of a bigger player that might make more sense? And then there are ESOP holdcos out there as well that you can possibly sell to, if you're really into the ESOP concept, so it really comes down to that, in terms of, number one, how liquidity versus legacy come into the equation here on whether an ESOP can make sense. Now let's go ahead and change gears here to a partial versus full exit. And often, as we mentioned, you have legacy and you have liquidity being one of the key motivators driving ESOPs. But let's go ahead and talk about those. And there's no right or wrong answer here. It really comes down to a few things. Go ahead and kick this off here. Number one is timing. So what does your overall succession and liquidity planning look like when you combine it with maybe your next act? Maybe you scale this business up and want to do something in the future. Maybe you're in your 50s and say, hey, I want to plan my retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, it could be, hey, I'm close to retirement, and let's go ahead and, look at maybe a full ESOP exit. So liquidity really drives, whether it's a partial ESOP, which we mean less than 50% ESOP ownership, or going 100%.
Yeah.
So a couple factors there, and then of course value. We'll talk about that in a second, and then lastly financing too.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on the timing aspect of it, we see, you hear all the buzzwords, the silver tsunami, things like that of retirees, that people that are at retirement age or older. And these individuals are selling the company. And typically they want to sell the whole thing and retire, as it were. But we are seeing, and back me up on this if you see it too, a lot of Gen Xers that just want to take some chips off the table. Perhaps they feel that investment is better made elsewhere, or they're a serial entrepreneur, or any number of things. And I think that that's becoming more and more commonplace.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll share the story of a recent ESOP client and ESOP transition we did. Controlling shareholder Gen X, the father started the business 35 years ago, and then father's retired, and Gen X son, who's now in his mid to late 40s, implemented EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System, and part of that 5-year plan was going ESOP. So they first focused on EOS, got that up and running, and then hired us to do the initial ESOP fit analysis, figuring out the structure, what made sense. We settled on a 49% ESOP structure, so minority. What that did is got some liquidity for the father, got some tax benefits for both the father and the company. Tax benefits are going to be in one of our subsequent episodes, so stay tuned for that. And combined with EOS, and EOS has that ownership mentality, ESOP makes it happen. So you have this culture that has an ownership mentality working towards their 1, 3, 5-year goals here, and 10. They have a pretty awesome 10-year growth plan, and the ESOP is the capital structure that's going to make this whole thing happen. So that was really fun to execute. We raised bank financing, got them, with a growth-oriented lender to help them grow. The industry they're in, heavy construction, so think roadways, heavy pipelines, etc., all over California. So that one was a fun one, and it was kind of a puzzle, right? So when you think about this, it's like, okay, they could have went 100%, but it didn't make sense. I think they will in the future, though. But right now, the 49% structure made the most sense.
A couple pieces I want to pick out there. One, probably the easiest, we could talk about this the shortest. You said, they'll probably go 100% down the road. So I don't know that a lot of people realize that if I sell 49%, as this company did, that's not the end of the road. A lot of people refer to it as getting a second bite at the apple. So if I own 100% of Benco and I want to sell to an ESOP, but I sell 49% right away because I still want to maintain control, all of that. That doesn't, maybe 10 years down the road when I'm a little bit older, like, okay, I want out, I want to retire. I can sell the remaining to it. And I don't think a lot of people realize that we could go anywhere from, even if you sell 10% the first time, you could sell 20 more, and now we're up to 30. You could stair step it. And I think that's an important thing to realize. They are each individually their own transaction, but they follow the same pattern, the same flow. You could probably even use the same team if you wanted to. But then with that is the financing. We and you specifically had to raise bank financing for this. Let's compare and contrast a 100% deal versus a minority deal that involves bank financing. And then let's say we don't want to use the bank. What then? So for this example with 49% and bank financing, talk me through how that kind of works.
Yeah, exactly. So, the question whether to go bank financing or not, and we'll cover the whole financing aspect of ESOPs in a subsequent episode here, but I'll give the TLDR, the high level here. So big question is liquidity needs. So if you want it to feel like a sale, and if you have reinvestment requirements, unless there's a bunch of excess cash on the balance sheet, the only way you're going to achieve that in an ESOP sale is bank financing. So in this case, bank financing was a must. And plus, they needed a new banking partner anyways. They were working with a local bank. And when I spoke with them about ESOPs, they would basically try to convince them to not go ESOP. It's just kind of red flag there, and so on. But in any case, we set them up with very much a growth-oriented, nationwide, but very much regionally focused bank, and they're helping them with capex, so on. So, anyways, it's going to be a good partnership. It has been for the past 1+ year. Moving forward, it's going to be a great one. But that's the overall decision when you start off with bank or no. It's not required, no matter what people tell you. Some people in the industry say, "Oh, you have to get bank financing." No, it's not required at all. It just comes down to, hey, what is your personal liquidity requirement and reinvestment requirement? So, again, we do a lot of bank financing. Flip side, if you do no bank financing, then you're looking at carrying a seller note. And what that means is you're going to get paid back over course of whatever the horizon is with a market rate interest. So some sellers say, hey, I'm bullish on the company and I'm fine with carrying that risk, meaning, I'm fine with selling 49% or even 100% to the company and financing the whole thing on my own and having the company pay me back via its cash flows, and I can act as the bank, and also earn that return, right? So that is very common as well with these deals, and in our ESOP fit analysis, we do very much a deep dive, so that you make the best decision possible. But that's it, and if you compare contrast 49% to, let's say, 100% sale, I gave the example of the 49%. Now, when we think about 100%, we've done numerous of those, of course, in our 51-year history. The past couple of years, we've done, numerous as well, these 100%. Share the story of a general contractor in California. And speaking about that, initially, he's the son of the founder, and he's now in his mid-60s. And in his late 50s, he started getting approached by a lot of PE-backed construction tech plays. Went down that path and then realized, hey, this isn't the right future for the company. And then contacted us back in 2022, late 2022. And then we compare and contrast the ESOP 100% option, and we showed them 49 and 30%. And long story short, we settled on 100% ESOP transition, and overall price that he got all in, is very comparable to what he was seeing on those other offers. And the benefit too is some of those construction tech plays have went belly up, bankrupt past couple of years, right? And that would have been such a horrible end game for this company that's been in business since 1960, right? So ESOP has let them continue. Employees have skin in the game. He's very proud as well. He's still involved in the business, still is on the board and so on. And the company still has that culture as well in place. So it's overall been a win-win. So overall, the decision to go minority, which we mean below 50%, and the reason why it's called minority is that the ESOP then is a minority shareholder, versus 100% control, it's very much a nuanced decision. It's not you must go 100%, or not. I know some players in the industry like to just pitch 100% or nothing, because if you make a percentage fee, right, you're going to get a bigger payday that way. But sometimes it doesn't make sense. And, we're totally indifferent. What we do is do a holistic overview of cash flows, what your goals and objectives are, where the company is today, and help you figure out what makes the most sense there.
Yeah, it's very much based on the company's goals and objectives. You're absolutely right. And, I think you touched on some great points there, that that liquidity piece is very important, but also the legacy that exists and you want to continue to exist. One other piece that we often run into is people are interested in the ESOP idea. The company looks like a good fit, but we're not quite sure about how to make it all work. And sometimes in that instance, because we've spoke about before, an ESOP is a qualified retirement plan. So we, do what we call a pre-fund option, where we set up the plan itself, the ESOP itself, but no shares change hands at this point. The company then makes annual cash contributions to this retirement plan and builds up cash that eventually, within 5 years, as per regulations, buys the shares from a selling shareholder and uses that cash and either bank financing or seller financing if there's additional funds needed to get the shares in the hands of participants. And we see that sometimes that makes sense if your growth trajectory is such that, I feel like an ESOP's a good idea, but we're going through a time right now where we're kind of stair-stepping growth, having these leaps and bounds, or, any number of reasons. And I think that it can be an effective tool to roll out that ESOP now, get the employees happy, educated about it, and, start to enjoy some tax benefits as well. But, there are cons. And I think, once the cash is in the plan, it has to stay there unless you turn it into shares of company stock. So there are some pitfalls there, Trevor. I can't really think of anything else other than trapping the cash there.
Yeah, that's, and give a couple examples here. So we set up a pre-fund ESOP, and and to be honest, I don't know if a lot of people in the industry do this or not. We've been doing this for a long time because it makes a lot of sense. You think, okay, what is an ESOP? And at the end of the day, it's just a retirement plan, right? And a lot of the industry focuses on the transaction, in terms of the ESOP actually buying the stock, but it's two different things. The ESOP itself, which is housed inside of the ESOT, Employee Stock Ownership Trust, is just that. It's a retirement plan. So part of what we do, and since we have the capability to do this, is assess and be like, okay, let's say your company's at, say, 1.5 mil EBITDA today, but you want to get to 3 to 4 to 5 and then sell to the ESOP. You don't need to wait. We can set up the ESOP today. Every year, the board can decide how much cash you want to contribute to that ESOP. And then what happens is, number one, when you make that decision to have us set it up, we do the employee rollout, tell the employees what's going on. You get them jazzed and excited about the future of the business, saying, hey, this is the direction the company's headed. Awesome. Buy me in, right? And so on. So that's a huge benefit. And two, once the company decides how much cash it wants to contribute, and it's not setting itself up for any commitment. It can decide to contribute nothing or, up to 25% of eligible pay, right? You have that wiggle room there. Gets the tax deduction. So I'll just kind of give an example here. Let's say you and I decide, hey, let's contribute $1 million to the ESOP Radio ESOP Trust, next year. So what do we get? We get $1 million tax deduction, and now there's $1 million in that ESOP trust. Guess what? All the employees of ESOP Radio get a statement showing their piece of that pie. So this can continue for up to 5 years, and then the ESOP can use that cash as a down payment to buy ESOP Radio stock.
Yeah, that's
so
it.
it's huge because it basically allows you to get the ESOP set up and out of the way, focused on performing, and also in that ESOP ecosystem as well. In those situations, we're sitting there monitoring value the whole time and, really plugged in with the company and, figuring out, hey, when does it make sense to transact, and so on. And then when it does, it's like, okay, do you do 30%? How much do you do? Right. So we've done, I'll give two examples here. Consulting firm up in the San Francisco Bay Area, they pre-fund for 4 years and then did a 100% transaction last year. And then Phoenix, Arizona, a successful electrical contractor, basically bought this company from the founder in 2022, hired us to do a ESOP in 2023, pre-funded for a couple of years, and then did a 100% transaction. And during that time, him and his team built the company from 2 to 9 mil EBITDA. Super impressive over a very short period of time. And his whole goal with that is, okay, I'm buying this company. He used SBA financing and went 100% ESOP and built it from 2 to 9. It was such a success story, fun one. So a lot of options there. And of course, the idea here is not to shove one solution down. It's like, what makes the most sense, right, for you, for the business, and the future of the business, and design a structure around that.
You're absolutely right. It's not all about the numbers. We do a lot of heavy analysis when it comes to whether it's the ESOP fit or we do some benefits analysis. We do a lot of number crunching, but if it's not a fit culturally or as part of your legacy succession plan, whatever, then it doesn't make sense. And I've been avoiding this the entire episode, but how do we judge when an ESOP is the wrong answer? Our final topic, there are times where somebody will come to us and say, hey, I want to sell to my employees. I've got XYZ company. We do a couple $1 million in EBITDA, and we say, okay, well, let's take the first steps. Let's do it. But we find out, a few things along the way that make it not a good fit. We commonly see that it might not cash flow. That 2 million in EBITDA was this year, but maybe next year it's only going to be 800,000. Things like that. Additionally, maybe this is what we call a hobby or lifestyle business, and I refer to it as, this person owns their job. Yeah, you bring $2 million to the bottom line. That's amazing. You built this business up, but if you're gone, everything's gone. We've talked about this before. You're driving the ship here because every contract comes through you, every decision comes through you. And then once you leave, all your customers might find another vendor or what have you, or another contractor. So sometimes that's an unfortunate instance.
Exactly. Yeah, you think that kind of situation. Okay, what is the true intrinsic value of that company, right? And if it's a hobby, lifestyle, business, it's like the intrinsic value is to support your lifestyle, right? Or
Yep.
you're having fun doing this. So is
And
there true enterprise value? And can you build a hobby or lifestyle business into an enterprise? Absolutely. I know you and I are both car buffs. Think bringatrailer.com, the car auction website, right? I mean,
yep.
that kind of started off very much, back in 2007 as that. Now it's well, owned by Haggerty's, right? And
Yeah.
it's huge
Huge.
machine.
Yeah.
So you can definitely still do that.
And
Um,
that's a very good point, because we have seen companies that have started in garages or sheds, from, if you're a custom machinist or something like that, that have turned into successful companies, that have turned into successful ESOPs. But we've also seen companies that have started in sheds that didn't amount to nothing other than that person's job, essentially, their career, their livelihood.
Exactly. I would say too, okay, so we covered these. One big one, and a lot of it comes down to value, right? And as we always mention, you and I both have valuation accreditations, seen hundreds of ESOP valuations, M&A valuations, and so on. Value is always a range, right? It's not one number. It's not your business is worth 20 million, or whatever the case is. But one key reason why an ESOP might not make a lot of sense is if you can sell for a much higher price in the open market. And I'm saying, hey, think like an AI or tech company, right? You have these companies with negative earnings, yet they're worth 50 billion, 250 or whatever, based on their most recent VC rounds. Probably not going to be a good ESOP candidate at the end of the day, right? Because what makes an ESOP go is cash flows. It always ties back to your cash flows. So company is worth 100 million and so on, but it's not cash flowing. Guess what? The ESOP is not going to work because there's going to be no money to pay the ESOP debt. So that's a big one, is that. And then next up, and we've talked about this as well in the prior episodes, is if your company is better off with a larger organization. And some are, in the CPA accounting industry, we've seen a huge, massive roll up lately, with all these regional players being scooped up, often by the large players who are private equity backed, right? And I'm sure every single one of those accounting firms, and some do go ESOP, et cetera, but, kind of make that decision like, hey, should we go ESOP, or do we need to find a cash buyer to cash out all these partners who are retiring and, and so on, right? So, that kind of decision kind of comes in too, right? But, it's sad because a lot of, good names, have lost their independence, their identity, in that sort of industry roll-up. CPA firms, that's a big one. Engineering, we're seeing that across the board, and so on. But that's very much a board decision, right? What makes sense. And it always is a bit sad, when a good brand name gets scooped up and eliminated, right? You
Right.
know.
Right.
And lastly, I would say too is if status quo is, you don't want to do anything, no action. That's always a option.
Oh,
Is no action, right? And status quo. So if that's the case, then yeah, ESOP might not make a lot of sense. But I will say at some point, succession planning is going to find you. It's a matter of time, right? So, often you want to plan early, know your options, be strategic about it, and not have your options make the decision for you.
right.
Whatever few options you have, if you're in that position there. But yeah, let's go ahead because I know we're kind of at time here, and let's have some real talk here about why some owners regret choosing an ESOP.
Yeah. So the examples I can think of are really, they got too far along in the process. They sold maybe 30%, and then it just didn't work the way they wanted it to. Perhaps what they stated as their goals were not actually their goals. And it seemed like, they were money driven in terms of liquidity. I want the highest and best price, perhaps a strategic buyer, roll up company, what have you. And then they felt that the ESOP just didn't give them what they wanted. Do you have a more specific example that you can think of?
Yeah, definitely. And a couple thoughts here too before we dive into that is, overall the ESOP, we see ESOPs get terminated all the time, right? Because
Mhm.
ESOPs get formed and created for very specific reasons. Some of them thrive, just like companies going public. Some stay public forever, and then you read, hey, a company goes public and then it's taken private in 2 years, right? Wall Street Journal is full of those stories. Same thing with ESOPs. It's ESOP comes in, it's a shareholder, it can serve a purpose, and sometimes due to changing economic conditions, industry changes, and so on, maybe it doesn't make sense anymore.
Mhm.
So you do see that. So and again, it's a board decision, right, to you know adopt or terminate or freeze an ESOP. But I'll give a story of and this is very rare, but one client who ultimately kind of regretted, but then came around and accepted it. So, a client fact pattern here: in his early 20s, he developed a series of pizza chains, built it up to pretty impressive. Think like 30 mil annual revenue and so on.
It's a
And
lot of pizzas.
yeah, exactly. And some were at college campuses, et cetera. And he's based in the Southwest. I'm not going to give the town away, but based in the Southwest there, and built a really impressive business. Once he got to his mid 40s, he approached us and was like, hey, this ESOP, and he's part of a high net worth group, learned about this ESOP option, and said, hey, like, let's explore that. We did 100% ESOP transaction. He still remained the CEO. He called me 2 years after the deal and said, oh, I'm kind of having this existential crisis. Like, I just feel like I need to, since I'm still the CEO, I need to own the company. So we ran the math and looked at everything, in terms of him buying back the company and so on. And it just didn't make sense. And he finally accepted it. So it wasn't a matter of him thinking he sold too cheap and,
Mhm.
or he didn't like the ESOP structure. It wasn't that at all. He really liked the employees having skin in the game. All that was working out. It just was very much, a kind of, personal mentality, right? That, he needs to be the owner. And we told him, like, well, you're in the ESOP because he was in it, right? And
Mhm.
you technically are that way. So, any case, kind of, worked with them. And, some of this kind of also comes into, sort of psychology too, right? I mean, most things are, right? But, kind of walked through it all and, spent a lot of time weighing the pros and cons and what it all looked like. He finally came to accept it. And then what he did is, and this is what he planned to do all along, he went on and started another venture,
Mhm.
which made a lot of sense because that was his goal all along. So, he still has ties to the pizza restaurant on the board and so on, but ended up being a win-win because the company's still 100% ESOP. But that was, rare call to get, right? Is that, and you just have to walk through, peel back the onion, right, and kind of talk this through. So
Yeah.
that's in a nutshell. Some, just like anything, some companies say they go IPO, right? Sometimes they regret that. Of course, totally different outcome here than an ESOP, but it is rare. Most people who go ESOP are very happy that they do.
Hmm.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. That's it for episode 3. And to recap, we covered 3 key reasons why owners like you go down the ESOP path and why they don't. Number 1, liquidity, legacy. Number 2, partial and or full exit motivations. And then we also mentioned the pre-fund ESOP option there. We covered when an ESOP is the wrong answer. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it and got something out of today. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Trevor Gilmore and Ben Spadt. You can look us up. You can also find ESOP Radio and Menke on LinkedIn as well. We have real case studies and ESOP news on our website. And reach out to us to learn more about our ESOP fit analysis. And that's the first step in assessing if an ESOP is right for you. Have an awesome day. Join us for episode 4, ESOP Tax Advantages. Take care, everyone.
Thanks and goodbye.